Hello students and namaste everyone. I am Dhaval sir and our today's topic is your standard 8th literature part unit number 10, the Great Stone Phase part 2. In my previous lecture students, I have already given you the introduction of this chapter as well as I have already explained you the detailed summary of this chapter. So today we'll start with the explanation part, that is line by line explanation of this chapter, and try to understand it in detail. So let us begin. Many years passed. Ernest was now a man of middle age. That means from a young boy, okay, he had grown up, become a grown up person, and from that grown up person now he was going towards his old age. To his neighbors who never suspected that he was anything more than an ordinary and familiar face, he was only a humble and a hard-working, though thoughtful person. Right? That means he was such a simple life living person, right? That his neighbors always considered him to be a common person or a common man, and he was never noticed by any people. But what about the old prophecy? Was it ever fulfilled? Let us read it out and find out the answer to this question. Okay. The years hurried on, that means the years passed on and brought white hairs upon the head of Ernest and made wrinkles across his forehead and furrows in his cheeks, that is deep lines, wrinkles. He was an old man, but not in vain had he grown old. That means he had grown old, but his life was not in vain. Why? We'll find out. More numerous than the white hair on his head were the wise thoughts in his mind. Right? So this is the reason, because he had led such a wonderful life, right? And he was such a wonderful person that he had a lot of lively thoughts, beautiful thoughts in his mind, which not only came in his mind but he also implemented in his life, that is by helping other people. And Ernest had ceased to be obscure. Ceased means, obscure means not well known. That means first, when he was young enough, he was not well known, he was not famous, he was not known to the people. But now he has ceased to be obscure. Ceased means now the situation is not so. Now he is known to many people, right? Unsought for, undesired, had come the fame which so many seek. Unsought for, undesired, had come the fame which so many seek. That means the poet or the writer is trying to say that though Ernest had never ever in his mind thought to become famous or known to many people around, he had actually become very famous, right? He had never desired for that thing, he had never thought about that thing, but due to his good deeds, due to his good thinking, he had become very famous, and the people all around the valley and outside the valley also knew Ernest very well. He had become famous beyond the limits of the valley, right? So that I've already explained that not only the people of valley but outside the valley, the people at distant places also knew Ernest very well. College professors and even the active men of cities came from far to see and converse with Ernest, and he received them with gentle sincerity and spoke freely with them of whatever came uppermost or lay deepest in his heart or their own. That means the writer is trying to say that if any person who came to Ernest for taking his advice or to talk with him, he would gently greet them and speak with them sincerely, and try to help those people with his level best efforts. While they talked together, his face would brighten, unawares, and unawares means unknowingly. That means he was not aware, but when people they met him and talked with him, they would find a brightness on his face and a shine upon them as with a mild evening light. Okay. While Ernest had been growing old, God had granted a new poet to this earth. That means, on one hand, Ernest was growing older, and on the other hand, a person from the same valley, okay, he was becoming very famous as a poet. Okay, he too was a native of this valley, but had spent the greater part of his life in a distant cities, pouring out his sweet music everywhere. Right, he was impressing the people around the valley and outside the valley through his poems, beautiful poems. Okay, neither was the great stone face forgotten, for the poet has celebrated it in a poem. That means, in each and every poem, the poet, okay, who is the son of this same valley, used to mention about the great stone face. The songs of this poet found their way to Ernest. That means, somehow these poems reached to Ernest also. He also read these poems. He read them after his customary toil. Okay, so customary toil means the meaning is given usual work. That means he used to complete his daily routine, daily work, and then he used to read these poems. Seated on the bench before his cottage door, as he read, he lifted his eyes to the mountain. That means when he read these poems, he used to look at the mountain. Okay. O great stone face, he said, is not this man worthy to be your likeness? Right. So when he read the poems, he found it so impressive that he started imagining that this person, this poet, might be the likeness of the great stone face, because in his poem there were great thoughts, okay, and great imagination. The face seemed to smile but did not answer. Now it happened that the poet thought he lived so far away, had not only heard of Ernest but had thought much about his character and wished to meet this man whose wisdom walked hand in hand with the noble simplicity of his life. That means, on the other hand, about whom Ernest is thinking, that is the poet. So that poet, on the other hand, was actually thinking about Ernest. Okay, this poet came to know about the kindness and the wisdom of a person in the valley who was actually the Ernest. So he was actually thinking about him. Why? Because he was the person. Ernest was the person who lived his life with simplicity, okay, and with a lot of wisdom and knowledge. So he also felt that he should meet Ernest, okay. One summer day, therefore, he arrived at Ernest's door, where he found the good old man holding a book in his hand, which he read, and then, with a finger between the leaves, looked lovingly at the great stone face. Okay, so here leaves means the pages. Good evening, said the poet. Can you give a traveler a night's shelter? Okay, so the poet is asking for one night's stay or a shelter at Ernest's home. Gladly answered Ernest. That means Ernest said, yes, why not? And then he added, smiling, I think I never saw the great stone face look so hospitably at a stranger. Okay, so Ernest is saying that I have never seen the great stone face looking at the stranger in such a kind or a gentle way. Further, the poet sat down beside him and he and Ernest talked together. Never before had the poet talked with a man like Ernest, so wise and gentle and kind. That means, in his life, the poet had never met any person like Ernest, who was so wise and gentle. Okay. Ernest, on the other hand, was moved by the living images flung out of the poet's mind. Okay, that means, on the other hand, one side the poet is impressed by Ernest, and on the other hand, Ernest is also impressed by the poet. Why? Because in his poem, he had such a lively, he had such a vivid thoughts. Alright, Lively means he had such a beautiful thoughts in his poem that he found these poems to be most beautiful. Okay. As Ernest listened to the poet, he imagined that the great stone face was bending forward to listen to. He gazed into the poet's eyes. So this is actually just the imagination that the great stone face is trying to bend forward to listen to the poem. So this is just the imagination of the Ernest. Who are you, my gifted guest? He asked. Right now, the Ernest is asking, who are you? The poet laid his finger on the book that Ernest had been reading. Right, so till this time, Ernest was not aware who the other person was. Right, so when asked, the person is saying that the book which you are reading is written by me. Okay, so what he is saying, you have read these poems, said he. You know me, then for I wrote them. So the poet is saying that the poems which you are reading every day is written by me. Again and again, Ernest exclaimed the poet's features. That means he was looking at the poet and then he would look at the great stone face. He turned towards the great stone face, then back. He took his head and sighed. That means, sighed means he became sad. When he looked at the great stone face, then again he looked at the poet, he was very sad. Why? We'll see. Why are you sad? Inquired the poet. Because, replied Ernest, all through life, that means all through my life, okay, I have awaited the fulfillment of a prophecy that is Bhavishwani. So Ernest is saying that all through my life, I have always been waiting for the prophecy to get fulfilled, okay. So, and when I read these poems, I hoped that it might be fulfilled in you. So Ernest is saying that when I read the poems, I had assumed or I had thought that this poet who is writing this poem, so actually the person who is sitting in front of him, he said that I thought that you might be the resemblance, okay, or likeness of the great stone face. But when he compared the poet with the great stone face, he did not find any kind of likeness. Okay, what the poet is saying? You hoped, answered the poet, faintingly smiling. Faintly smiling means not giving a great smile. Okay, to find in me the likeness of the great stone face, I am not worthy to be its likeness. So the poet is saying that it is a good thing that you thought of me to be the likeness of the great stone face, but what the poet is saying that I am not worthy, okay, to resemble or to be the likeness of the great stone face. So Ernest is asking, what Ernest is asking, and why not? Asked Ernest. He pointed to the book. So ultimately, the Ernest is trying to say that you have such a great thoughts, you have presented it in your poems. So why not, right? Why you are saying that you are not worthy to be the resemblance or likeness of the great stone face? So what Ernest is saying, are not those thoughts worthy? You can hear in them the distant voice of a heavenly song, right? But my life, dear Ernest, has not corresponded. Corresponded means been in harmony with. I'll explain you in detail. Has not corresponded with my thoughts. So what the poet is trying to say, that what my thoughts are there, they are just the thoughts. They are just written in they are just in the written form, but I do not implement it in my real life. That means I am not able to implement it myself. So these are just my thoughts, okay. In real life I do not practice it. So he is trying to say that I have had grand dreams, but they have been only dreams. Sometimes I lack faith in my own thoughts. Okay, so this is what the poet is saying. Why then, pure seeker of the good and true, should you hope to find me in the face of the mountains? So that means he is trying to say that if I myself don't believe in me, then why should you have such a faith that I am the resemblance or likeness of the great stone face? Okay. The poet spoke sadly and his eyes were wet with tears. So two were those of Ernest. That means both of them were very sad. At the hour of sunset, as had long been his custom. Okay, had long been his custom means from the very long time he had the habit of sitting in the evening time. Okay, outside the cottage. So, at the hour of sunset, as had long been his custom, Ernest was to speak to a group of neighbors in the open air. Together, he and the poet went to the meeting. That means the Ernest had the habit of spending his time in the evening after his work to the group of neighbors living around. Okay, and as per his daily routine, he along with the poet went to meet the neighbors. Okay, from there could be seen the great stone face. So Ernest threw a look of familiar kindness around upon his audience. He began to speak to the people what was in his heart and mind. Right? That means he was so wise and kind that the things came directly from his heart, and he would open mindedly give suggestions to the people. His words had power because they agreed with his thoughts. That means the writer is trying to say that the earnest, what he used to speak, he used to practice it himself. Okay, so it had great power, and his thoughts had reality and depth because they harmonized with the life which he had always lived. Right, as we have seen about Gandhiji also. One lady, she complained Gandhiji that please you tell my child not to eat good. Okay, so Gandhiji said that you come after 2 to 3 days or 1 week. Then the lady went away, and again next week when she came, Gandhiji advised his son not to eat good. And at that time, the lady said that why, when the previous time when I came, you did not give advice to my child. So at that time, Gandhiji said that if I myself was eating good, then how can I give the advice to the other person not to eat it, right? So he said that once I practiced not to eat good, then only I can give the advice. So in the same way, Ernest, whatever he said or whatever he spoke, he used to practice it himself in his life, and that and then only he used to give advice to the other people. Okay. So therefore it is said that his thoughts were harmonized with the life which he had always lived. It was not mere breath that the preacher uttered. That means it was not simply the words which he used to speak. Okay. They were the words of life. A life of good deeds and selfless love was melted into them. The poet, as he listened, felt that the life and character of Ernest were a nobler strain of poetry than he had ever written. That means he is trying to say that whatever thoughts, okay, he has presented in his poem till date, even means as compared to that, the thoughts and the life of Ernest is even more nobler. That means even more worthy than his poems. Okay. His eyes filled with tears, and he said to himself that never was there so worthy a sage, sage means a wise man, as that mild, sweet, thoughtful face with the glory of white hair diffused about it. Diffused means his white hair spread all around his face. Okay. At a distance, but clearly to be seen, high up in the golden light of the setting sun, appeared the great stone face. So at present, the poet is looking at the great stone face where the sun is setting and its golden light is falling on the face of the great stone face. With white mist around it. Mist means the fog or the clouds which is formed around the mountain. Like the white hairs around the grove of Ernest. Right. So the mist or the fog or the clouds which were formed around the mountain looked like as if it were the hairs of Ernest, okay, around his face. At that moment, Ernest's face took on an expression so grand that the poet was moved to throw his arms up and shout. That means when the poet was looking at the great stone face and at the same time at Ernest, he was so surprised and happy to find that Ernest himself was actually the resemblance of the great stone face, and he could not stop himself and he just shouted, "Behold, behold, Ernest is himself the likeness of the great stone face." Right, so he started shouting and informed the other people. Right, here in the picture we can see the great stone face, okay, and the mist or the fog or the clouds around it, and at the same time we can see the earnest face also, which is resembling the great stone face. Then all the people looked and saw that what the poet said was true. The prophecy was fulfilled, but Ernest, having furnished what he had to say, took the poet's arm and walked slowly homeward. That means every day he used to meet the neighbors, he used to talk with them. So as usual, he talked with them, and as his work was over, he started moving towards his own home. Okay, still hoping that some wiser and better man than himself would by and by appear, bearing a resemblance to the great stone face. Right. So even the poet and the other people of the valley agreed that it was Ernest himself who was the resemblance of the great stone face, but Ernest himself still thought that even a more better and a wise person will come who will be the resemblance of the great stone face. That was his greatness. Right? Though other people were praising him to be the likeness of great stone face, he was so great that he himself never considered him to be the resemblance or likeness of the great stone face. Okay, so that's it about the chapter. Okay, I'll end my lecture over here, and I thank you everyone for watching my video.